I was pouring my second cup of coffee on a Tuesday morning when someone started hammering on my front door like they were trying to break through solid oak with their bare fists. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado, where the most exciting thing that usually happened was someone's golden retriever getting loose and visiting all the neighbors for treats. This kind of aggressive knocking was not normal. When I opened the door, a woman in her mid-50s stood there with a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was a shield. She had that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and wore a pastel pink cardigan despite it being 75 degrees outside. Her name tag read Brenda Patterson, HOA president. "Can I help you?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Mr. Quinn." She squinted at me like I was something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "That's me, James Quinn. I'm Brenda Patterson from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your delinquent account immediately." She said this with the kind of authority usually reserved for judges and police officers. I blinked at her. "I'm sorry, what?" "You owe the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA 10 years of unpaid dues, along with late fees and interest. The total comes to $43,872. She thrust a paper at me with numbers highlighted in yellow. I took the paper, staring at it like it was written in ancient Greek. "There must be some mistake. I'm not part of any HOA. Don't be ridiculous. Every home in Meadowbrook Estates is part of the association. It's mandatory." Brenda's voice had that patronizing tone that made my teeth clench. "Look, I bought this house 3 years ago. Nobody said anything about an HOA. I never signed any HOA documents, and I've never received any communications from any association." I kept my voice level, but confusion was rapidly turning into irritation. "That's not my problem. The debt transfers with the property. You bought the house, you bought the obligation." She tapped her clipboard with one manicured nail. "We expect payment within 30 days, or we'll be forced to place a lien on your property. You can't just show up and demand $43,000 from someone who isn't even part of your organization. That's insane." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I suggest you check your attitude, Mr. Quinn. The HOA has legal authority here and we will exercise it. 30 days. With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus parked in my driveway. I stood there holding the paper, my coffee getting cold on the kitchen counter. This had to be a mistake. I went inside and dug through my file cabinet until I found the folder from when I bought the house. I pulled out the deed and sat down at my kitchen table to read through it carefully. The house was located at 847 Pinecrest Drive in Boulder. I had bought it from an elderly couple named the Hendersons who were downsizing to a retirement community in Arizona. The sale had been straightforward. I remembered my real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Sarah, walking me through every document. There had been no mention of an HOA. None. I would have remembered because I specifically asked about it during the home search. I did not want to deal with an HOA. I looked at the deed more carefully. The legal description was clear. My property was described as Lot 47, Block 3, Pinecrest Edition, County of Boulder, State of Colorado. There was no mention of Meadowbrook Estates anywhere in the document. No covenants, conditions, or restrictions attached. Nothing about an HOA. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah Mitchell, my real estate agent. She answered on the third ring. "James, how are you? How's the house?" "Sarah, I need to ask you something. When I bought my house, was there any HOA involvement?" "No, absolutely not." "That was one of your requirements, remember? You specifically wanted a house without an HOA. That's why I showed you the Pinecrest properties. That whole area is HOA free. Why do you ask?" I explained what had just happened with Brenda. Sarah was silent for a moment. That's completely ridiculous. Your property has never been part of Meadowbrook Estates. That's a different subdivision entirely. They're not even adjacent to your neighborhood. Are you sure? Positive. I've sold houses in both areas. Meadowbrook Estates is on the west side of Table Mesa Drive. Pinecrest Addition is on the east side. They're completely separate developments built by different builders about 5 years apart. Whoever this woman is, she's either confused or trying to scam you. That made me feel slightly better, but also more concerned. So what should I do? Get a real estate attorney. Don't ignore this. Sometimes HOAs can be aggressive, and even if they're completely wrong, they can cause problems. You need someone who can shut this down officially. I thanked her and hung up. Then I spent the next hour searching online for real estate attorneys in Boulder. I found one with good reviews named Robert Chen and called his office. His receptionist scheduled me for an appointment the next day at 2 in the afternoon. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that $43,000 number. Even though I knew I wasn't part of their HOA, the threat of a lien on my property was terrifying. A lien could affect my credit, my ability to refinance, maybe even force a sale of my house. I had put everything I had into buying this place. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman-style home with a big backyard where I planned to eventually get a dog. The neighborhood was perfect, quiet, with actual neighbors who waved and smiled. I loved it here. The next morning, I received a certified letter. I had to sign for it at the door. Inside was an official-looking document on Meadowbrook Estates, HOA letterhead demanding payment of the $43,000 within 30 days and threatening legal action. There was also a breakdown of the charges. 10 years of annual dues at $1,500 per year, plus late fees of $500 per year, plus compounded interest at 8% annually. The math was creative but technically added up to their claimed amount. At 2 o'clock, I was sitting in Robert Chen's office in downtown Boulder. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me everything," he said. I laid out the whole situation, showing him Brenda's demand letter, the certified mail I had received, and most importantly, my deed. Robert studied the deed carefully, then pulled up something on his computer. He typed for several minutes, clicking through what I assumed were property records. "Your agent was right," he finally said. "Your property is part of Pinecrest Addition, which was platted in 2008. Meadowbrook Estates was platted in 2003. They're completely different subdivisions. According to the county records, Pinecrest Addition has no HOA and never has. When it was developed, no covenants or restrictions were filed with the county. So I'm in the clear, legally, yes. You owe them nothing. However, we need to respond to this formally. If we ignore it, they might actually file a lien and then you'll have to go to court to get it removed. That's time-consuming and expensive even though you'd win. Better to nip this in the bud. What do you recommend? I'll draft a cease and desist letter explaining that your property is not now and has never been part of their HOA. I'll cite the deed, the county records, and the legal descriptions. I'll also warn them that any attempt to place a lien on your property will result in legal action against them for slander of title and potentially harassment. How much will this cost me? For the letter and initial consultation, $500. If they push back and we need to do more, we'll discuss it then. It seemed reasonable. I agreed, and Robert said he'd have the letter drafted and sent out within 2 days. I left his office feeling better but still uneasy. Something about Brenda's confidence bothered me. She hadn't seemed like someone making an honest mistake. She had seemed absolutely certain. 2 days later, Robert emailed me a copy of the letter he had sent to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA via certified mail. It was professional, firm, and laid out all the facts clearly. I felt like this would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following Monday, I came home from work to find a bright orange sticker on my front door. It said violation notice in huge letters. According to the sticker, I was in violation of Meadowbrook Estates HOA rules for having grass that exceeded the maximum height of 3 inches and for having a non-approved mailbox. I stared at the sticker in disbelief. My grass was maybe 2.5 inches tall because I had literally mowed it 3 days ago. My mailbox was a standard black metal box that had been there when I bought the house. This was insane. I called Robert immediately. "They're escalating," he said after I explained. "This is harassment. Take pictures of the sticker, your lawn, and your mailbox. Date stamp everything. We're building a case here." "A case for what?" "If they keep pushing, we're going to sue them for harassment and possibly seek damages. But let's see if they respond to my letter first." Sometimes it takes a few days for these things to filter through their bureaucracy. But it didn't stop. The next day, there was another sticker, this time claiming my house needed repainting and that I had visible trash cans from the street, which violated community standards. My house had been repainted 2 years ago and looked great. My trash cans were in my garage. I took more pictures. I was starting to feel like I was under siege in my own home. On Wednesday, I got another certified letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 for the violations, and that the fines would continue at $500 per week until the issues were resolved. It also stated that I was forbidden from attending HOA meetings to dispute the fines until my delinquent dues were paid. That night, I decided to do some investigating. I drove over to Meadowbrook Estates to see what I was dealing with. The subdivision was about 2 miles from my house, on the other side of Table Mesa Drive, just like Sarah had said. It was newer than my neighborhood, with larger houses that all looked vaguely similar. Very cookie-cutter. There were signs everywhere. No parking on street. Maximum speed 15 mph. HOA patrolled community. I found the HOA office, which was actually just a converted garage at one of the houses. The sign out front listed Brenda Patterson as president, and below that were names for treasurer, secretary, and several board members. I took photos of everything. As I was taking pictures, a woman came out of the house. She was younger than Brenda, maybe in her 30s, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Can I help you?" she asked. She didn't seem hostile, just curious. "I'm James Quinn. I've been receiving notices from this HOA claiming I owe them money." Her expression changed to something like recognition mixed with discomfort. "Oh, you're the Pinecrest guy. Pinecrest guy." She glanced back at the house, then stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. "Look, I'm just the secretary. I take minutes at meetings. But I'm going to tell you something you should know. Brenda has been talking about your property for months. She thinks Pinecrest Addition should have been part of Meadowbrook from the beginning. Something about the original developer promising to include those lots, but then selling them off separately to avoid HOA costs. That doesn't give her the right to claim my property is part of her HOA when it isn't. I know. I've told her that. So has our treasurer, Doug Martinez. But Brenda doesn't listen. She's convinced that if she pushes hard enough, she can force the issue. She thinks you'll either pay up or she can get a judge to rule that there was an error in the original platting. That's fraud. The woman, whose name I learned was Sophie, nodded. Probably. But Brenda has this way of bulldozing people. Half the board is scared of her, and the other half just goes along because it's easier than fighting. Why are you telling me this? Because it's wrong. I've lived here for 6 years, and I'm tired of Brenda running this HOA like her personal kingdom. She fines people for ridiculous things. Last month she tried to fine the Kowalskis because their daughter drew a hopscotch court on their driveway with washable chalk. She called it graffiti. I felt a surge of gratitude toward Sophie. Thank you for being honest with me. Just be careful. Brenda doesn't back down easily, and she has money to throw at lawyers. I drove home thinking about what Sophie had said. This wasn't just a simple mistake or misunderstanding. Brenda was trying to pull off some kind of power play or land grab. The question was why. What did she gain from claiming my property was part of her HOA? The next morning, I called Robert and told him about my conversation with Sophie. That's very helpful, Robert said. It establishes intent. If we can show she knows your property isn't part of the HOA but is claiming it anyway, that's fraud. It also might be extortion. What's our next move? I'm going to send another letter, this time more forceful. I'll threaten legal action and specifically mention fraud and extortion. That might scare their board enough to rein Brenda in. And if it doesn't, then we sue. And we win. Robert sent the second letter that afternoon. I spent the evening trying to relax, but every little sound outside made me jump. I kept expecting another sticker or another certified letter. Friday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this James Quinn? The voice was male, older, with a slight Texas drawl. Yes. Who's this? My name is Doug Martinez. I'm the treasurer for Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I got your lawyer's letter and I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere neutral? I was suspicious but curious. Why? Because I want to help you stop this before it gets worse, and because I'm about to resign from the board and I want to do the right thing before I go. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop on Pearl Street in an hour. I called Robert first to let him know what was happening. He advised me to record the conversation if Colorado was a one-party consent state. I looked it up and it was, so I set up a voice recording app on my phone. Doug Martinez turned out to be a stocky man in his 60s with gray hair and a weathered face. He looked like someone who had spent years working outdoors. He was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, nursing a black coffee. "Mr. Quinn," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Thanks for meeting me. Call me James. What did you want to talk about?" Doug took a deep breath. "I'm going to be straight with you. What Brenda is doing is wrong. Your property isn't part of our HOA, never has been. I've checked the records myself. I've tried to tell her this, but she won't listen. Why is she doing this? Money and power. Meadowbrook Estates is struggling financially. We have about 80 houses in our subdivision, and we're supposed to collect $1,500 per year from each. But we've got terrible reserves because the previous board spent like drunken sailors on amenities nobody uses. We built a pool that costs a fortune to maintain, and we repaved all the streets 2 years ago at 3 times what it should have cost because Brenda's brother-in-law got the contract." I felt my stomach sink. So she's trying to rope in more houses to increase revenue. Exactly. She figures if she can bully you into paying, and maybe some of your neighbors too, she can shore up the budget. Plus, she just likes having power over people. Being HOA president is the only thing in her life that makes her feel important. That's insane. I know, and it's illegal. That's why I'm resigning from the board and why I'm here talking to you. I don't want to be part of this anymore. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. I made you copies of some documents you might find useful. Financial records showing our budget problems. Emails where I explicitly told Brenda your property isn't part of the HOA, and minutes from a board meeting where she said she didn't care about the legal technicalities and was going to pursue it anyway. I took the folder, stunned. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because someone needs to stop her, And because I'm done being a coward, I should have stood up to her months ago. He stood up. Good luck, James. You're going to need it. After Doug left, I sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, going through the documents. They were explosive. The emails alone showed that Brenda knew my property wasn't part of the HOA but was pursuing me anyway. In one email, she wrote, "We'll worry about the legalities later. Right now, we need to establish a claim and make him pay." I immediately drove to Robert's office. He was just finishing up with another client, but when his receptionist told him I had urgent documents, he made time for me. Robert spread the documents across his desk, reading through them with growing amazement. "This is incredible. This proves everything. She knowingly made false claims against your property. That's fraud. That's actionable. What do we do now? Now we go on offense. I'm going to file a lawsuit against the HOA and Brenda Patterson personally for fraud, harassment, slander of title, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're going to ask for an injunction preventing them from contacting you or making any claims against your property. And we're going to ask for damages, including your attorney fees and compensation for your time and stress. How much are we talking about? I'd suggest we ask for $50,000 in damages plus attorney fees. That sends a message that this behavior has consequences." It felt surreal. 2 weeks ago, I had been minding my own business, and now I was suing an HOA for $50,000. But Robert was right. This needed consequences. The lawsuit was filed the following Tuesday. Robert had it served on both the HOA and Brenda personally. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I imagined it wasn't pretty. For a few days, things were quiet. No more stickers, no more certified letters. I started to hope that maybe the lawsuit had scared them into backing off. Then, on Friday evening, I got a knock on my door. It was a process server with another lawsuit. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was suing me for $43,000 in unpaid dues, plus now an additional $10,000 in fines for various violations, plus legal fees. They were also seeking a lien on my property. I called Robert immediately, even though it was after 6 o'clock. He answered, "Thank God." "They're countersuing," I said. "What do I do? Bring me the paperwork tomorrow morning. This is expected. They're trying to intimidate you. It won't work." Saturday morning, I met Robert at his office. He reviewed the HOA's lawsuit and actually laughed. "This is terrible legal work. Half of it is boilerplate that doesn't even apply to your situation. They clearly hired a cheap lawyer who does cookie-cutter work. Judge Harrison is going to tear this apart." Judge Harrison. The judge assigned to our case. She's sharp and doesn't tolerate nonsense. This is actually good for us. Over the next few weeks, the legal process ground forward. There were filings and responses and motions. Robert handled all of it, keeping me updated. The HOA's lawyer, a guy named Peter Somebody, sent increasingly desperate motions trying to get our case dismissed. None of them worked. Meanwhile, I started hearing from some of my neighbors in Pinecrest Addition. Apparently, 3 other families had received similar letters from Brenda claiming they owed HOA dues. All of them lived on my street. I connected them with Robert, and he agreed to represent them as a group. We were now a class action lawsuit. This development seemed to rattle the HOA. Their lawyer requested a settlement conference. Robert and I, along with the 3 other homeowners, met with Peter and 2 HOA board members at a mediator's office in Boulder. Brenda wasn't there, which I found interesting. The mediator, a retired judge named Sandra Ellis, listened to both sides present their cases. When it was our turn, Robert laid out everything. The deeds proving our properties were never part of the HOA. The emails from Doug showing Brenda knew this. the financial documents showing motive, and the pattern of harassment. Peter, the HOA's lawyer, tried to argue that there had been an honest mistake, that the HOA had simply been confused about the boundaries of their jurisdiction. Robert pulled out the email where Brenda said, "We'll worry about the legalities later." Judge Ellis looked at Peter over her reading glasses. "Counsel, this doesn't look like an honest mistake. This looks like attempted fraud." Peter stammered something about overzealous leadership, but Judge Ellis cut him off. "Let me be clear. If this goes to trial, your clients are going to lose. Badly. And then there will be a judgment against them that could bankrupt your HOA. I strongly suggest you settle. We caucused in separate rooms. Judge Ellis came to our room first. They're scared. What do you want?" Robert looked at me and the other homeowners. We had discussed this beforehand. "We want a written statement admitting our properties were never part of the HOA. We want all claims dropped and all fines canceled. We want a promise that they'll never contact any of us again, and we want them to pay our attorney fees. Damages." I thought about it. Honestly, I just wanted this over. "No damages if they agree to everything else," Judge Ellis nodded. "That's very reasonable. Let me talk to them." She was gone for 30 minutes. When she came back, she had a settlement agreement. They've agreed to everything. They'll issue a public statement clarifying the boundaries of their HOA. They'll pay your attorney fees, which I've capped at $12,000 to be reasonable. And they'll never contact any of you again. If they violate this agreement, you can go straight to court for contempt and damages. We all signed. Peter looked miserable. The 2 board members with him looked relieved. As we were leaving, one of them, a woman named Patricia, approached me in the parking lot. "I'm sorry about all this. Most of us on the board didn't know what Brenda was doing. When we found out, we forced her to resign. She's no longer HOA president." "What happened?" "Doug Martinez sent all those documents to every board member and every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates. There was an emergency meeting. The vote to remove Brenda was unanimous among everyone except her. She's threatening to sue the HOA now, but our lawyer says she doesn't have a case." I felt a wave of relief. "I'm glad you did the right thing." "So are we. I hope you can understand that not everyone in the HOA supported this. Some of us genuinely didn't know." I believed her. She seemed sincere. "I appreciate you telling me that." 2 weeks later, I received a check for $12,000 covering all of Robert's fees. I also received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA with an official statement declaring that 847 Pinecrest Drive and the surrounding properties had never been part of their association, and that all previous claims were withdrawn. They filed this statement with Boulder County, so it was now part of the official property records. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong, but in a good way this time. 3 months later, I got a call from Doug Martinez. "James, I thought you'd want to know. The state attorney general just filed charges against Brenda Patterson." "For what?" Turns out our HOA wasn't the only one she was running. She was also president of another HOA in Louisville. She pulled the same scam there, but worse. She actually managed to get liens placed on 2 properties and then had the HOA foreclose on them. She bought the properties at the foreclosure sale through a shell company. The attorney general is charging her with fraud, theft, and racketeering. I was stunned. That's insane. It gets better. The FBI is involved too because she did this across county lines, which makes it a federal case. She's looking at serious prison time. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad that someone would throw their life away over greed and a power trip. "Thanks for letting me know, Doug. Thank you for standing up to her. If you hadn't fought back, she'd still be out there doing this to people." After I hung up, I sat on my back porch with a beer, looking at my yard. The grass was exactly the length I wanted it. My mailbox was the style I liked. My house was painted a color I had chosen. Nobody was going to find me or threaten me or try to take my home away. 6 months later, I read in the Denver Post that Brenda Patterson had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and racketeering. The article detailed her schemes across multiple HOAs, the families she had hurt, and the money she had stolen. The judge had been harsh in sentencing, noting that Brenda had abused positions of trust and shown no remorse. I cut out the article and filed it away with all the documents from my own case. I hoped I'd never need to look at them again, but I wanted to have them just in case. Life returned to normal. I finally got that dog I had been thinking about, a rescue mutt named Cooper who loved to run around the backyard. My neighbors and I occasionally joked about the HOA incident, but mostly, we just enjoyed living in a neighborhood where we could do what we wanted with our own property within reason. One evening, about a year after everything started, I was grilling burgers in my backyard when my neighbor Tom came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, want a burger?" "Absolutely." He settled into one of my patio chairs. "I wanted to say thanks again for fighting that HOA thing. If you hadn't stood up to them, they might have come after all of us." "They did come after some of us. You were one of the ones who got a letter." "I know, but you were the first. You set the example. You showed us it was worth fighting." I flipped the burgers, thinking about that. I didn't really have a choice. They were trying to steal $43,000 from me. You did have a choice. You could have paid them to make them go away. You could have sold your house and moved. Instead, you fought. That takes courage. I had never thought of it as courage. It had just seemed like the right thing to do, the only thing to do. But maybe Tom was right. Maybe standing up to bullies, even when it's scary and expensive and uncertain, is a form of courage. Well, I had help. Robert Chen is a great lawyer. And Doug Martinez gave me the evidence I needed. Sophie warned me what Brenda was really up to. It wasn't just me. "But you were the one who put it all together. You were the one who refused to give in." Tom raised his beer. "To not giving in to bullies." I clinked my beer against his. "To not giving in to bullies." As the sun set over Boulder and Cooper chased fireflies in the yard, I felt deeply content. My home was really mine, free and clear of any fraudulent claims. The woman who had tried to take it was in prison where she belonged. And I had learned something important about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The whole experience had taught me that documents matter. My deed had been the key piece of evidence that proved I was never part of that HOA. Without it, things could have gone very differently. It also taught me that not all HOAs are evil, just like not all people are evil. The problem was Brenda and people like her who abuse power for personal gain. I thought about all the families Brenda had hurt over the years. According to the news reports, she had scammed at least 15 homeowners across 3 different HOAs. Some had paid her fraudulent fines. Others had lost their homes. The fact that she was finally being held accountable felt like justice, not just for me, but for all of them. A few weeks after my conversation with Tom, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer representing the victims of Brenda's various schemes. They were organizing a class action lawsuit against her for damages and wondered if I wanted to join. The lawyer explained that while Brenda was in prison, she had assets that could be seized to compensate victims. I thought about it, but ultimately decided not to join. I had already gotten what I needed: vindication, my attorney fees, and peace of mind. Other victims had lost much more than I had. They deserved whatever compensation was available. Instead, I wrote a letter to the lawyer explaining what had happened to me and offering to serve as a witness if needed. I figured my story, with all the documentation I had collected, might help other victims prove their cases. The lawyer wrote back thanking me and saying my offer might indeed be valuable. Around that same time, I started seeing changes in Meadowbrook Estates. The new HOA board, led by Patricia and some other reasonable people, made reforms. They cut the excessive fines, scaled back the ridiculous rules, and focused on actual community maintenance rather than petty enforcement. They even invited homeowners from Pinecrest Addition to use their pool for a small fee as a gesture of goodwill. I considered it but decided I preferred my quiet backyard. One Saturday morning, I ran into Sophie at the grocery store. She was the secretary who had warned me about Brenda's intentions. We chatted in the produce section for a few minutes. "How's the HOA doing?" I asked. "So much better. It's actually pleasant now. We use board meetings to discuss real issues like street maintenance and snow removal, not to plot against innocent homeowners." She paused. "I'm really sorry about what happened to you. I should have spoken up sooner." "You spoke up when it mattered. That took courage." She smiled. "I heard Brenda tried to sue the HOA from prison." "Really?" "Yeah, she claimed we had no right to remove her as president. The judge threw it out in about 5 minutes. Apparently, prison hasn't changed her personality." We parted ways, and I continued my shopping, marveling at how one person's greed and ego had affected so many lives. But I also marveled at how many people had ultimately done the right thing. Doug Martinez providing evidence, Sophie giving me insider information, the board members who removed Brenda, the judge who saw through the fraud, and Robert Chen who fought for me. That summer, I decided to host a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. I invited everyone on Pinecrest Drive, including the 3 other homeowners who had been targeted by Brenda's scheme. We grilled food, drank beer, and told stories. At one point, someone raised a toast to living in an HOA-free neighborhood, and everyone cheered. Later that evening, as people were leaving, one of my neighbors, an older man named Frank who had lived on the street for 20 years, pulled me aside. "You know, James, something good came out of all this mess." "What's that?" It brought the neighborhood together. "Before your fight with that HOA, we all kind of kept to ourselves. Now we actually know each other. We look out for each other. That's worth something." He was right. The crisis had created community. We had formed a neighborhood watch, not the formal kind with signs and meetings, but the informal kind where we noticed if something seemed off at a neighbor's house and checked in on each other during storms or when someone was sick. As autumn arrived and the aspens turned gold on the mountains above Boulder, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience. It had been stressful and scary and expensive, even though I ultimately got my attorney fees back. It had consumed months of my life and caused countless hours of anxiety. But it had also taught me important lessons. I learned that documents are your best defense. If I hadn't kept good records, if I hadn't had my deed readily available, the fight would have been much harder. I learned that there are good people willing to help when you're in the right. Doug, Sophie, Robert, the judge, even Patricia and the other board members who removed Brenda, they all played a part in justice being served. Most importantly, I learned that you can't let bullies win just because fighting is hard. Brenda had counted on people being too intimidated or too tired to resist her fraudulent claims. She had probably succeeded many times before she tried it on me. But when someone finally stood up to her and refused to back down, her whole scheme fell apart. I also learned about HOAs themselves, something I had never really understood before. They're not inherently bad. In theory, they serve a legitimate purpose: maintaining common areas, preserving property values, providing amenities. The problem comes when someone like Brenda takes control and uses the HOA as a personal fiefdom. The lack of oversight, the assumption that board members will act in good faith, and the broad powers given to HOAs create opportunities for abuse. In the years since the incident, I've followed news about HOA reform legislation in Colorado. There have been several attempts to increase transparency, limit fines, and create easier appeals processes for homeowners. Some have passed, others haven't. It's a work in progress. But at least people are paying attention now to the potential for abuse. As for my life, it continued peacefully. I got a promotion at work, an engineering firm in Boulder where I designed renewable energy systems. Cooper grew from a rambunctious puppy into a slightly less rambunctious adult dog. I dated someone for a while, a woman named Amy who worked at the university. It didn't work out, but we parted as friends. 3 years after the incident, I decided to refinance my mortgage to take advantage of lower interest rates. The process was smooth and uneventful. When the title company did their search, they found the official statement from Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, declaring that my property had never been part of their association. The title agent mentioned it in passing. "Looks like there was some confusion about an HOA at some point," she said. "Something like that," I replied. "Well, it's all cleared up now. Clean title, no issues." Those words, clean title, no issues, felt like the final punctuation on the whole saga. My home was truly, unequivocally mine, with no clouds on the title, no fraudulent claims, no threats hanging over me. I sometimes wondered about Brenda. What makes someone become like that? Was it always in her nature, or did power corrupt her gradually? Did she ever feel remorse for the people she hurt? I would never know the answers. All I knew was that she had tried to victimize me and failed, and that her failure had ultimately led to her facing justice for all her crimes. One spring day, about 4 years after everything started, I was working in my front yard planting flowers when a car pulled up. A young couple got out and stood looking at the house across the street, which had a "for sale" sign in the yard. They walked over to me. "Hi, we're thinking about making an offer on that house. Do you mind if we ask you a few questions about the neighborhood?" "Not at all," I said, standing up and brushing dirt off my knees. They asked the usual questions about noise, crime, schools, traffic. Then the woman asked, "Is there an HOA?" I smiled. "No, no HOA. Never has been, never will be. It's one of the best things about this neighborhood." "That's great," the man said. "We're specifically looking for non-HOA properties. We had a terrible experience with one at our last place." "I can relate," I said. And I told them an abbreviated version of my story, enough to explain why I appreciated living HOA-free, but not so much that I scared them away from the neighborhood. They listened with wide eyes. "Wow," the woman said. "But it all worked out okay." It did. The key was having my deed to prove I wasn't part of their association. Documents matter. "We'll keep that in mind," the man said. They ended up buying the house across the street. Nice couple, Tom and Lisa Brennan. They had a toddler and a baby on the way. They fit right into the neighborhood. At their housewarming party, Tom mentioned to everyone that I had given them great advice about keeping careful records of all their property documents. "James told us this story about an HOA that tried to claim his house," Tom said. "It sounded like a nightmare, but he fought them and won." Several neighbors chimed in with their own versions of the story. It had become neighborhood lore, apparently, the time we all stood up to a fraudulent HOA. The story had gotten a bit embellished in the retelling, but the core truth remained. As I listened to my neighbors recount the tale, I realized something. This story wasn't just about me anymore. It had become part of the neighborhood's identity, a reminder that we looked out for each other and didn't let ourselves be pushed around. In a way, that was Brenda's legacy, though not the one she intended. Instead of intimidating us into submission, she had united us in resistance. Years continued to pass. Cooper got older and slower but remained my faithful companion. I eventually started dating someone seriously, a teacher named Allison Harper who loved hiking as much as I did. We talked about moving in together, maybe getting married someday. She loved my house and especially loved that there was no HOA to tell us what color we could paint the door or how tall our grass could be. I grew up in an HOA neighborhood, Allison told me once as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Everything had to be perfect. No personality, no character. Every house looked the same. It felt sterile. Not here, I said, gesturing at the diverse houses visible from my yard. Some were painted bright colors, others natural wood. Some had elaborate gardens, others simple lawns. Some had quirky mailboxes or lawn ornaments. It was eclectic and real and alive. I love it here, Allison said, and I could tell she meant it. We did get married eventually in a small ceremony in my backyard with close friends and family. The neighborhood threw us a surprise reception afterward because that's the kind of place it was. People cared about each other. On our wedding night, as Allison and I were cleaning up, she asked me about the framed newspaper article hanging in my home office. It was the article about Brenda's sentencing. "Why do you keep that?" she asked. I thought about it. As a reminder, I guess. A reminder that justice is possible, that standing up to bullies matters, and that documents are important. Also, honestly, as a warning. It reminds me to never take for granted that this house is really mine. It reminds me to keep good records and stay vigilant. Do you think something like that could happen again? I doubt it, but if it did, I'd know how to handle it. Allison kissed me. That's one of the things I love about you. You don't back down when you know you're right. Time moved on as it does. I heard through the grapevine that Brenda was released from prison after serving most of her sentence. I never saw her around Boulder, though. I assumed she moved away, probably too ashamed to stay in a community where everyone knew what she had done. Meadowbrook Estates continued to function as an HOA, but a reasonable one. Patricia served as president for several years and did a good job. They maintained their common areas, organized neighborhood events, and enforced sensible rules about actual nuisances. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. Sophie, the secretary who had warned me, eventually became president herself. She reached out to me once to thank me again for standing up to Brenda. "You have no idea how miserable she made life for so many people," Sophie said. "Not just you and the others she tried to scam. Even the people in her own HOA were walking on eggshells, afraid of fines for ridiculous violations. You freed us from that." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. By fighting back, I had helped not just myself but everyone who might have been Brenda's future victims. Doug Martinez, the treasurer who had given me the crucial evidence, became a friend. We occasionally met for coffee or beer. He had retired fully from HOA work and seemed much happier for it. "I spent 10 years on that board," he told me once, "and I thought I was doing good work. Then Brenda came along and corrupted everything. It took your situation to make me realize I had to act. I should have done it sooner." "You did it when it counted," I assured him. "That's what matters." Robert Chen, my attorney, and I stayed in touch as well. He occasionally sent me articles about HOA law or cases similar to mine. "You set a good precedent," he told me. "Your case gets cited sometimes when other people fight back against HOA overreach." That made me proud. My ordeal had meaning beyond just my own situation. It had helped establish that HOAs couldn't simply claim properties that had never been part of their association. It had shown that homeowners could win against fraudulent HOA claims if they had documentation and were willing to fight. A decade after the incident, I was cleaning out my file cabinet when I came across the original demand letter from Brenda, the one asking for $43,000. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the fear and confusion I had felt that day. Then I looked around at my home, my life, everything I had built. That letter had threatened all of it, but in the end, it had failed. I thought about shredding the letter and all the other documents from that time. But something stopped me. These documents were history. They were proof of what had happened, of what I had overcome. They were a testament to the importance of standing up for yourself and the value of keeping good records. I carefully put everything back in the folder and filed it away again. Maybe someday my kids, if Allison and I had them, would find these documents and ask about them. I would tell them the story. I would explain how their father had faced down a bully and won, how justice had prevailed, and how important it is to never let anyone take what's rightfully yours without a fight. The story of Brenda Patterson and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA became a cautionary tale in Boulder real estate circles. Agents mentioned it to clients when explaining the importance of reviewing property documents. Title companies used it as an example when training new employees. It even came up in a Colorado state legislative hearing about HOA reform. For me, though, it gradually faded from daily thought. It became simply part of my past, an experience that shaped me but didn't define me. I was James Quinn, renewable energy engineer, husband to Allison, dog owner, neighbor, friend. The guy who fought off a fraudulent HOA was just one aspect of who I was. But on quiet evenings, when I sat on my porch and looked at my property, my home, my slice of the American dream, I sometimes thought about that moment when Brenda stood at my door demanding $43,000. I thought about how different my life might have been if I had simply paid her to go away, or if I had sold my house and moved rather than fight. I had made the harder choice, the right choice, and it had paid off. My home was mine, truly and completely. No one could take it from me with fraudulent claims and aggressive demands. I had the documents to prove it, the legal precedent to back it up, and the hard-won knowledge of how to defend what was mine. As the sun set over the Flatirons and the evening light painted my yard in gold and amber, I raised a glass of bourbon in a silent toast, to documents that prove the truth, to lawyers who fight for justice, to whistleblowers who do the right thing, to judges who see through fraud, to neighbors who stand together, and to everyone who has ever stood up to a bully and refused to back down. The HOA had claimed I owed them 10 years of dues. My deed proved I was never part of their association. In the end, that was all that mattered. The truth, documented and undeniable, had set me free.